I want to welcome you to the Meacham Conversations, and today we have Stephen Corey. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right. We thought we'd begin with having you maybe read a poem.
All right, I'll do that. I'll grab my other glasses for that.
Don't you hate that?
I know. This poem is part of a curious project that I undertook unintentionally. I was sitting in a motel room one time and had been thinking about how the poems I had been writing recently seemed to be going on too long. And so I was looking at those little notepads that they leave you, little tiny things by the phone. And I said, what if I made myself write some things that had to fit on one of those? And I did that.
It's like Ammons with the tape for the turn of
Well,
the year.
right. And this was not the poem that I wrote first, but it was the one that became the kind of the title for the section or group of poems. It's called Poems of This Size. In poems of this size, so little might happen. One wonders if such brevity can matter. As when I strolled 30 years ago with my wife, a year before she was my wife, in her first neighborhood, and we heard that familiar, horrible squealing of tires down the block. And because she was a young nurse, no doctor in sight, when we reached the small boy lying on the red brick street with many people gathered around, she had to step forward and kneel, had to be the one cradling him and wondering most closely at how quick and full an end can be.
Thank you very much. It has a kind of narrative base to it, which a lot of poems do have a narrative base. Have you ever really written much fiction?
No, as a matter of fact, the few times that I've tried it, I felt to be, no, it turns into a miserable failure. I have a very strong sense that it takes a very different mindset and ability to observe in a different way. And I always felt as though I was just fumbling around ridiculously, especially when I tried to do anything that had to do with the dialogue. So I didn't go very far with it.
Yeah. How much of the scene is actually reportage, and how much is invented in the particular scene there with the accident?
That particular piece is very closely drawn from something that happened. I have other things that I hope sound as truthful that are totally fabricated. But
how do you see your work as having developed over the years?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I think my sense of the importance of music, of sound in the poems. I'm not a formalist in general, but I have written some formal poems, and I think that they've often been important vehicles for getting down what I wanted to get down. And I think the integrity of the line is still extremely important to me, and it's one of the things that ends up annoying me about a lot of the work that I see come through for the magazine, where I get the very strong sense that the writer isn't working the line in some thoughtful way. It's just decided that he or she wants to write poems, and so you stop before you get to the end, and that's about the sum of the integrity of the line.
Yeah. You haven't written formal poems, but your poems have a kind of they're very conversational on the one hand. They're laid back, and they kind of sneak up on you at the end. And I'm wondering who some of your influences might have been.
Oh, I'm probably wondering too, but I think that this thing about sneaking up at the end, I guess maybe I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but I do have an interest in endings, strong endings. And I think that also ties in with thinking about formal poems, in the sense, thinking historically, that poems tend to have a certain kind of bang
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, I don't know how they've influenced me in terms of how I actually write, but I mean, the people that I go back to all the time, probably most, would be probably Hopkins and Dickinson,
Oh, really?
because I think that they're working so hard at every second, and both in terms of the sound of what they're doing and the marvelous sense of imagination, the creation part of it.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit of Jarrell, actually. And the way
Well,
that
I may
you know,
sound more
yeah.
like him, but I guess I don't think of him as an influence.
A lot of your poems are filled with different kinds of paradoxes and stuff, and ways in which you make kind of odd connections. And I'm going to say this line again to you, which has been one that's always, it holds me. Searching for the words that nail sensations to the sky. In a way, I think that's what your poems often do, is that they're talking about everyday things, well, like the accident.
Yes.
And at the same time, they're trying to say there's something almost transcendent in here. And maybe that's what gives the poems a little punch at the end.
Yeah, probably. I have to watch myself sometimes. I think I don't want to overreach. I can get a little, I shouldn't say philosophical, because I'm not a philosopher. Faux philosophical, maybe sometimes, and but I like the idea of trying to blend abstract and realistic. I mean, I come down on the side of the realistic, but sometimes that underpinning helps.
Yeah. How was you mentioned looking at poems that come in for the Georgia Review.
Right.
How has editing affected your own work?
Well, I tell myself at least that it helps me. That you know, I've been doing, well, the Georgia Review I've been doing for 30 years now, and I did another little magazine before that, the Devil's Millhopper. And it's always, on one hand, it's a great privilege to get a chance to look at these things. Somebody's taking a chance on me as a reader, and I think, so I see a lot of ordinary work, and I see a little bit of very good work, and I see a lot of very weak work. And I think that I'm always reminded of how difficult it is, and of how hard you have to be willing and able to work if you're going to be good. And so I do my best to not have my work go out to other editors and have them place me in one of those lower circles, you know. Yeah. I think that people too often, they just don't recognize the stakes of what's going on. And it's sort of as if you thought you could, you like to play pickup basketball, so you thought you could go try out for the Knicks or something, you know, that you got to work long and hard at it.
Yeah, you edited a book on editing, different editors, and how would you see your role as an editor? What do you think, in general, what's an editor's role?
I've been told, sometimes happily and sometimes angrily by writers, that I see it differently than a lot of editors do. I think it's very, in the literary realm where we're working, where everything is always so, I don't want to say it's up in the air, but It's difficult to pin down just what the right thing is. It's not a scientific report. That my job isn't simply to read things and decide whether or not I like them well enough to publish. It's to find those things that I'm interested in publishing or possibly publishing, and then to infuse my 2 cents worth, to use my best sense of what that work is and is trying to do, and to go back to the writer. And this isn't always the case, but very often the case, that there are a few percentage points that a really good reader can add to, can offer up to even a really good work by a very established writer. So I go out on a lot of limbs. Okay, I write notes of complaint to some very accomplished, very famous, well-known writers. Well, well-known to us at least. And you have to do it the right way, of course. It's the writer's work, but and you know, and very often, I think I do help. I think I show the writer something that even he, even in his Pulitzer Prize-ness, missed, that maybe would make it a little better.
Yeah, it's incredibly important to have a good reader like that, I think, from a writer's point of view, to have somebody, because I know you've done that to me a couple of times, and pointed out sometimes just a little phrase or something, and all of a sudden I see, yeah, the poems just sort of change character with that.
And you don't have to be a writer to be a good editor, but for me, the fact that I do it myself helps me to step inside the work more, I think, and try and say, okay, not exactly if it were mine, but just to feel what's going on, trying not to lay on what I think it ought to be, but to see that there's a spot here where the poem or the story is not being what it wants to be in the best way.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great.